Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Tonight, Svan and I are going to continue our much anticipated study of the Gylfaginning, and pretty excited about that. So I know last week was a little bit, or not last week, 2 weeks ago when Svan was on last was a little bit janky because that night was the last night in our old home in Reno, and I am now coming to you from our new home in Gainesboro, Jackson County, Tennessee. So very excited to be here. Got not all the way there yet, but we're largely unpacked and situated in our new place, which has been fantastic. It's been awesome to get involved with local membership and stuff since being here. It's very nice. We're very fortunate to have AFA friends that helped us pack, helped us travel, helped us unpack, and we've been able to be at 2 different moots since getting down here. So it's been fantastic. Producer Nick was over at my house earlier today to use our internet because he had a power outage situation where he was at. So it's cool to already be getting into some AFA community here, which is fantastic. Top of the show things, as always, might as well start off with this. GW Farnsworth, you're amazing. Thank you for your continued donations. You're an example to us all. You donated 30 to folk services and 30 towards the heat situation at Thorshoff. So thank you very much for that. Stephen in Japan donated $20 for folk services. Origato, Stephen, we appreciate that. So we got that going on. Weekly update on Phrasehoff stuff. Again, you guys are awesome. We've made really good progress so far. We're sitting at 35.6% paid off. We still owe $80,490, but that is remarkably low at this stage in the game, which is really cool because you guys are amazing. And comes out to about 110 from every AFA member immediately pays that off. So something to keep in mind. And thank you guys. If you want to contribute to any of these things, donate at runestone.org. runestone.org/donate will get you there. And as always, your generosity is very much appreciated. Speaking of generosity in money, generosity in money is fantastic. We need it and we appreciate it. Be generous in your intellectual pursuits with us. If you have questions, it's a question and answer program. We do have material to cover tonight, but we're always here to answer any of the questions you might have about the text or about anything, ideally Asatru related, but we'll take all comers on it. So whatever questions you guys might have, we'll give it a shot. And we appreciate that, not just now, but whenever. So if you have a question that occurs to you when we are not doing the show, or I suppose while we're doing the show, if that's how you want to ask it, vns@runestone.org. Gets that to us, and we will answer any and all of those at our next available opportunity. And we've already got a couple that way for this week. And a number of you have made a really good use of that over the past few months. Appreciate that a lot. And I think that's been a good avenue to get questions. Other stuff. My daughter and I are traveling down in the morning to head to Njordshof in beautiful White Springs, Florida. Hoping to see you all there, or at least see many of you there. If it's something you can do, if you can make it there, we would love to see you there. Any of our folk builders can get you set up if that's something you'd like to do. It's a good opportunity to meet people. It's a wonderful opportunity to worship our gods and to be at Lord Njorder's Hof. So if you can be there, make it out. I would love to see you. It'll be great. It should be a really good weekend. Without further ado, where did we leave off 2 weeks ago?
I believe we are on section 16.
All right. So we are going at voluspow.org, and we are reading um, from the Prose Edda, the Gylfaginning. So feel free to follow along there. Follow along in hard copy at home or whatever you got. Any translation you want. Maybe it has something put in a slightly different way or something you can learn from. But feel free to follow along. And Svan, whenever you would like, go ahead and take us into the text. I think what we're going to do is do about an hour of text and commentary on said text. And if you guys have questions that are relevant to what we're reading, we'll try to hit those as they come. If not, we'll take a break somewhere about an hour in and answer, kind of clear the queue of the questions and go back into the text. So yes, Fawn, take us into Gylfaginning 16, if you would.
Okay, and just for a little context for people, we're leaving 15. 15 was about Yggdrasil, the ash that is in heaven, and that when the gods leave Ausgard, their castle, their enclosed kingdom in heaven, which is on the heavenly mountains, they come up and over and down to the base of Yggdrasil, where there is Earth and Verdandi Skald, the Norns at the well spring at the base of the tree where they revive it. So there's a little bit on the well. There's also the horses that they use to travel from the heavenly realm, or from Ausgard to the heavenly realm proper, if you will. And then there is the mention, really interesting part about how there are Norns of the gods, there are Norns of the elves, and there are Norns of the dwarves. And we spoke about, the common uses that we speak of today is Disir, which is, again, very important coming up for Disa thing, in which a Dis is a determiner of fate, a bestowing of goodly power or doom, depending on which way. At the very end of 15, it said, good Norns and of honorable race point good life, but those men that suffer evil fortunes are governed by evil Norns. So the Nornir are placers of fate, and it just kind of re-emphasizing cosmology and how the heavenly mountains being up above Midgard, where the gods live, the tree is, and is surrounded by the swathes of light, the light elves, and there will be some more, actually, because this is just, we noticed that these sections are furtherances on subjects. So 16 is further on the ash, further on Yggdrasil. So then Gangleri asks, what more mighty wonders are to be told of the ash? And Hai replied, much is to be told of it. An eagle sits in its limbs, and he has understanding of many things, and between his eyes sits a hawk that is called Veðurfolnir, or wind torn. The squirrel called Ratataskr, or chattering teeth, runs up and down the length of the ash, bearing envious words between the eagle and Nidaugur, the corpse gulper, or the nether gulper. And there are 4 hearts in the limbs of the ash that bite the leaves, and they are called Dawin, Dvalin, Dunir, and Durathror, which are the names of dwarves. And we don't necessarily know any story in relation to that, but by that naming system, we can clearly see that there's actually, I'm 100% in belief that there's a missing story as to how four Dvergar end up being the four hearts that are constantly kind of eroding Yggdrasil. So, and they describe the Ratatoskr climbs from the top of the tree and he goes down into the underneath the roots and into the holes and disappears and then travels his way down to the bottom at the tap root where Nidogr is gnawing on the root. Moreover, so many serpents are there in Hvergelmir. Hvergelmir is the well at the taproot, and with Nidogr, that no tongue can tell them, as it is said, Ash Yggdrasil suffers anguish. And that's kind of the whole point of the paragraph we just read, is that Yggdrasil is under constant assault. Ash Yggdrasil suffers anguish more than men know of. The stag bites above, on the side it rotteth, and Nidogr gnaws from below. And it is further said, more serpents lie under Yggdrasil's stock. So as Yggdrasil is in heaven, the heavenly mountains, and then the Midgard, and then Niðurvellir, and then even Niflheim, all descend below, and there are serpents gnawing upon the roots. More serpents lie under Yggdrasil's stock than ever unwise ape can think. Goin and Moin, they are Gravfitnir's sons, Graubakr and Gravolundr, Ovnir and Svaufnir. I think ye shall tear the trunk's twigs. It is further said that these Norns who dwell at the well of Urður take water from the well every day, and with it that clay which lies about the well, and they sprinkle it over the ash to end, and that its limbs shall not wither nor rot. For that water is so holy that all things which come there into the well become as white as the film which lies within the egg shell, as is here said. I know an ash standing called Yggdrasil, a high tree sprinkled with snow-white clay. Thence comes the dews in the dale that fall. It stands evergreen above Urður's well. And that dew which falls from it onto the earth is called by men the honeydew, and thereon are bees nourished. And two fowls are fed in Urð's well, and they are called swans. And from those fowls has come all of the race of birds. Then said Gangleri, thou knowest many tidings to tell of the heaven. What chief abodes are there more than Urð's well? And Haur said, many places there are, and glorious, that which is one called Alfheimr. There dwell the people called Ljósalvar, or light elves. But the dark elves dwell underneath the earth, and they, unlike in appearance, but by far more unlike in nature. And we've had classes on this. I've spoken about how Alvar, the word, the moniker, confuses people, but it is best way to remember that Alvar, with whatever's in front of it, is a being of pure synthesis to it. So the Ljósalvar are beings synthesized with light. Dark elves are synthesized with the darkness. We find this in the kennings, like Gandalfr, a being of the wand. And we also see it when the Vikings, in one of their Haiti, or one of their kennings, is that they are Skip Alvar, They're elves of the ship. So Alvar is a broad term. And even here it says, that they are unlike in appearance. The light elves are fairer to look upon than the sun, but the dark elves are blacker than pitch. Then there is also in that place the abode, Breidablik, or broad and shining. And there is not in heaven a fairer dwelling. There too is one called Glitnir, the scintillating or glittering. Those walls and all of its posts and pillars are of red gold, but its roof is made of silver. There's also an abode called Himmenbjörk, or heavenly mountains, or the castle upon the heavenly mountains. And it stands on heaven's edge, and by its bridgehead is the place where Bifrost joins heaven. Another great abode is there, which is named Fjallaskjalf. So when Bifrost comes down, it arcs up and over and descends over heaven's edge, and that's where it is met and continues into the heavenly realm. Valaskjalf, or the precipice of the chosen. Odin possesses that dwelling. The gods made it and thatched it with sheer silver, and in this hall is Hlidskjalf, or the battle precipice, or the viewing precipice. The high seat is so called, and there's debate as to whether or not was pictured as a cliffside or just a kenning for the name of the high seat itself. So in many depictions, you might see Lord Odin sitting on a cliffside in a high seat. And that's, again, that play on its interpreted meaning. Whenever the Allfather sits on this seat, he surveys all lands. At the southern end of heaven is a hall which is fairest of all, the brighter than the sun, and it is called Gimle. It shall stand when both heaven and earth have departed, and good men and of righteous conversation shall dwell therein. So it says in the Voluspa, a hall I know standing there than the sun fairer, thatched with gold in Gimle bright. There shall dwell the doers of righteousness, and ever enjoy delight. So we start to see some directionality in heaven, which is why I'm a big proponent for understanding that Ausgarder is in heaven. It's not the entirety of heaven, because we start to see this directionality that in the southern part of heaven, or in the place above the clouds where the gods live, in the southern part, it would be facing the sun, which is a huge cultural thing in the north, in northern European climates. To have your door facing the south was a boon. So it's saying that though it's got a prime spot, and at this point, it's mentioning that the souls of those amongst the gods will dwell there, and it survives Ragnarok. But there's another interesting thing that goes on that a lot of people don't talk about in cosmology, and that is the other heavens. And we have to remember that the word heaven being placed here is an elevated place. And it's very interesting when we go over the names of those places. I think they'll shed more light on what is being said. So in essence, this upper realm, this place amongst the Ljósalfar, where the Ljósalfar are kind of inhabiting the upper realms, the gods are there. And then we see what would in essence be an escalation. And I think that this is corresponding to the level upon which the gods interact with the earth, that there is abilities to be far removed from fate and far removed from the middle world, but they choose to be closer because they can interact. But those places become safeguards when heaven is under attack. And we could kind of see this as compartmentalization of heaven in a way in which it's in a cosmological sense. Their direct interaction with fate, with Orlaw, with creation, and all of these things, that by moving to these upper realms, there is a distancing that removes a lot of their ties, so they don't do that, but yet save it for when heaven's attacked. They can place the souls of those who have ascended there by choice via Valfather and his choosing of the Einherjar by the Valkyria, and by those who have ascended up there through greatness of deed and greatness of renown. And so even the souls in heaven, some of them.
Svan, we're going to pause for just a second. We got somebody blowing up the chat, very insistent that we answer a question. Apparently, I'm not sure what pagan revival is. I assume it is an outlet for raven folk or something. But somebody wants me to address, I guess, a variety of accusations there or whatever, but the closest I can tell is for me to address the Kevin Van Pay situation. So here's the thing. We had a guy, Kevin Van Pay, who applied number of years ago, and we had just kind of started our security team on figuring stuff out. Process was a little bit clunky. This is the first attempt by the AFA to have a security team and to vet applicants with like criminal history and stuff. And the guy had a sexual assault charge, and it was very ambiguous what exactly that charge was and the details of it were. We had a member at the time who's no longer a member, but was on that security team that vouched for the guy and said he knew him. During the vetting process, he slipped through the cracks and ended up joining and getting his invoice paid and being a member. So we were told a story that turned out not to be true about the circumstances of his sex offense. We said we're going to look into it. We started that process, and that fell through the cracks. He ended up getting in and becoming a member. To my knowledge, there was no harm or problem while he was a member. And 2 years later, when it was brought to our attention that, hey, wait, this guy's a sex offender and he's in, I'm like, hold on, show me about that. And as soon as documents were presented that he had a sexual offense involving a minor, we immediately got rid of him. In response to it, not only did we immediately get rid of him, we put measures in place so that wasn't going to be something that would happen in the future. We adopted a policy of, if you're a registered sex offender, you're not allowed to be a member, no matter the circumstance. That's something that, just to avoid any problems with it, absolutely not. And then we run a check at least once a year, if not a couple of times a year, on all of our members to make sure that no member either had slipped. Well, we ran the initial check to make sure nobody else had slipped through. And then we ran through and continue to run through. So in case something comes up, in the meantime that we don't know about, to make sure that we have no registered sex offenders in the AFA. So we check that at minimum once a year, often twice a year. And that's what I know on that. Anyways, back to what you were saying, Svan.
Oh, yeah. Addressing that, and I think is good, because a lot of people, I think even the gentleman who's no longer a member, who vouched for this person, is trying to say that we're in the wrong when it kind of falls on his shoulders. But
I mean, don't get me wrong. Clearly, if I had it all to do over again, knowing what I know, would not have, would have been more vigilant about the guy not slipping through the cracks. We've tried to keep, we were trying at the time, and we've continued to try to adjust to where more and more cracks are closed to where those kind of things can't happen. But, that's never been something that's, okay with the AFA. That's not an okay thing. And, we absolutely do our best. And, we try to, when a mistake happens, we try to learn from it and adjust accordingly as best we can. But no, that's the safety of our members and our families has always and continues to be extremely important to us. And so we're always working to make that as best as possible.
I also noticed a question here from Commandor Ham. He asked, are there three main Norns and they have good and evil helper Norns based off of what we were reading? And I think what it implies is that there's levels of fate, hierarchy, that the things in the divine realm are just like the material realm is a reflection of the divine, and there is hierarchy, and there are functionalities. And so what they're really saying is that there's layers of functionality within fate. The gods and the Nornir, that is the highest peak. But then the Nornir of, say, the elves and of men and of dwarves are, in essence, like what we would call Disir. That's just the more popular name that we use. And we do that to differentiate them from the Nornir with a capital N. And the Disir are the honorific kind of fate spinners or maintainers of fate throughout each of those groups. And the Nornir are at the top.
So I wanted to mention this back when we were talking about Yggdrasil a stanza ago, or a chapter ago, rather. However, it's not really a stanza, but I don't know what we call the sections of this piece. Anyways, there are a couple of things. There are catch-all names that imply a lot of stuff. And that's one of the situation when we're talking about the supernatural in our lore, is there's a lot of words that have layers of meaning. Svan was talking about the Nornir. Norn means witch. And it can mean spinners of fate in like the big Urther, Verdandi, and Skuld. It can mean lesser Nornir that are involved in the working out of mortals' fate. There's a whole realm of female divine and semi-divine personages that there's a lot of overlap between. It's like the term Disir. Disir means priestess. It also means goddess. And it means kind of all those things in between. Usually when it's a capital D, Disir, we're talking about elevated female ancestors that look on their family line. When we talk about the Nornir with capital N, it's usually the big three that are the main directors of fate in that way. But yeah, there's a lot of lesser female spirits that, including the Fylgja, that help to shape and to lay out the manifestations of fate. So there's a little bit of overlap there. But what I was going to mention on the tree, there's these circulating systems within our cosmos that exist. The women behind the scenes weaving together tapestries of fate, weaving together social tapestries and relationship tapestries is an ever-present theme. And I think that we see that in life. But also this motif of the tree, and that there's always these forces of chaos trying to nip away at or rot the tree or bite away at the tree or eat at the roots of the tree. I think there's some important symbolism about the devouring of roots and about rootlessness being, the start of death. But I think the idea of that circulating system, that replenishment of the tree by feeding it with this clay, with this pure clay, with nutrient-rich soil, with nutrient-rich things, and nutrient-rich dew, is fundamental. The idea that existence has this tree's circulating system as how it works, the idea that feeding negativity and chaos, injecting that into the circulatory system of this tree, makes it wither, makes it diseased, makes it unhealthy. Feeding it with right action, feeding it with the continuation of the gift cycle, with the relationship between Aesir and folk, keeps it healthy, it revitalizes it, it strengthens and it nourishes it. And it's all fed through this well of earth. And earth is cognate with the word fate, but it means like more than that. It implies a collectivity of actions that go in an ordered progression to cause outcomes. It is synonymous with the English word weird, the Old English word weird, and it means that. It means the playing out of fate being your actions and the culminations of your history and the things you bring with you, shaping how the future unfolds, shaping how destiny unfolds. And it shapes that through how this tree flourishes, how it grows, how it develops, and ultimately the things that it puts into motion or whatever fall off and go back into that which feeds the tree. But it's really, I think, very deep and beautiful imagery of how those very potent realities work within our cosmology.
And I didn't want to derail, but I did kind of want to speak up on something. One is that I know we have to get through the corpus of the lore, so we're doing the reading and then we answer questions. So for people in the audience, they know that's how we do this, just because we have to go over it. And we do. I think you and I both trail into some crazy stuff along the way. This Shade Forest that just commented, it's shameful that Matt and his leadership chose to remove everyone who spoke up about van pay rather than earn their trust back. And I would argue that it's far more shameful that the people who left didn't ask for an explanation. They didn't work towards an explanation with their church. They didn't give the church a chance. Many people just heard rumor, hearsay, and left. And you don't do that. That's really shameful when you have your kin fence and you hear these things and you don't know the details, but you just utilize it to do what you want. That's truly shameful.
Yeah, that's not what went down. Those people quit almost 100%. There was a select few that didn't, because they were actively trying to tear down the AFA and stuff behind the scenes and were unwilling to talk to anybody or whatever. There's a lot going on at the time behind the scenes, but nobody got removed for raising a concern. Not at all. When somebody raised a concern about van pay, we immediately got rid of them and we thanked them for letting us know, because we didn't know. Nobody had paid any attention or knew that that was a thing. That wasn't something. And as soon as it was brought to our attention, we immediately got rid of him. One of the only ones that got removed was literally the guy that had vouched for him and was kind of responsible for putting him in that position and abetting him for that amount of time. But no, that's not how it went down. And if that's what people have told you, you've been misled, and I'm sorry for that. A lot of that. Here's the thing too. It's easy to get irritated when it comes up because we've been dealing with those folks trying to make that into an existential thing for years now. But for a lot of people, it's their first time hearing stuff, and they're hearing things that are designed to scare them or get them very upset and riled up. And I don't fault people for having questions or asking questions. Questions are always welcome. And questions is kind of how this show got started, was, hey, when anybody has questions, please come and ask them straightforward. We're very happy to answer them. So I don't fault people for asking questions, but a lot of people have been lied to about this situation for nefarious means, unfortunately. So
here you go. As long as I've known you, even when I was just coming into the church, you always said you had an open door policy. Just come in, ask you questions. I do find it quite poetically beautiful that this is all going on when we're talking about the things that are gnawing at Yggdrasil. Like these elements that try to constantly tear down and dissipate and break or over spiral and purity spiral or split. It's a constant thing, and you can always tell. I think that's a good marker. Perhaps the idea is that, when you are on that onslaught, it's because you matter and because you are that center force. Nobody's really cracking down on outliers, edge walkers that have no point. The center is always constantly being attacked. Very, very divinely fitting, if you will.
And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But it's one of those things. It's just not true, and it's been weaponized, and the goal of it seems to be to tear down stuff that is good and successful. And unfortunately, a lot of well-meaning people get pulled away from our faith because of it. And then those people don't come back. Those people end up getting distanced from, a good relationship with the gods and an active ability to participate in the gift cycle. And, all for a lot of pettiness. And the folks that are at the top spreading those things know for a fact that they're not true, or at least the way they're characterizing them are grossly untrue. They all know that, but trying to tear down the AFA is more important to a lot of people than practicing Asatru in whatever they feel like the right way of doing that is. And that's something I think is relevant in our circles a lot and is worth discussing. Are people there's a lot wrong in the world, and I think we get that, but I think some people get very caught up to where they lose sight of the things that they're for, and they only define themselves by what they're against. There's a constant need to tear down, but an aversion or a lack of any focus on what they're for. And I think we see it with race a lot. I think when people become racially aware and they see the persistent degradation of white people, and they start being very anti, and they become more anti-other than they are pro-white. And I think that's unfortunate. And I think we see it in Asatru when somebody has a disagreement, either legitimate or illegitimate, with a group of Asatru, or their focus, and often this lands on the AFA, is to spend years complaining about the AFA rather than to spend time building whatever they think, the right way to do it is. And we see that time and time again. It's really unfortunate, but the most unfortunate part is people who genuinely don't know any better. They get caught in the middle, and it damages their relationships they have with their friends, their family, and with the ICER ultimately. So I hope people can overcome that. again, I'm always here for any questions. Answering questions is important. But while I'm on that, Nick donated $10 each to Sigerheim and Phrasehoff. Thank you for that. We appreciate it very much. Gilbert donated $200 to the Thorshoff Heat. Thank you for that, Gilbert. You are consistently amazing with that. We appreciate it very much. Andy donated $100 towards the Sigerheim mower. Thank you, Gilbert. We appreciate it. Also, Shannon donated 20 to Phrasehoff and 10 to the Thorshoff Heat. So thank you for that. Also, an additional 20 to Phrasehoff. So thank you for that, Shannon. And Monk donated $110 towards this broadcast. Thank you, Monk. We really appreciate it.
And just so there's no confusion, Nick in North Carolina donated that, not this Nick.
All right. There you go.
I was wondering if I could address one more question before
we
head off into the
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Morris Taylor 2445 asked, do the three Norns represent your mother in the past, wife of the present, and daughter of the future? I think that's a correlative symbology that you could place, but that the Nornir are predominantly the cyclical nature of time. One, the number 3 is dynamic. It's about movement. We see this throughout. 4 is stability, and 3 is movement, moving forward. And what you end up kind of getting is the names, because there's never a specification of perhaps appearance where one Nornir looks in a particular way. Instead, their names have more meaning about the source of all things. Öður is the one that is attaining, and Verdandi is in the skein of the moment. But interesting is Skald. Skald means debt. That which is brought about from the past. So it goes right back into, there's past, present, and that which is brought about by the past. And all of that flows back into the past. So there's this circular nature of time. Obviously amongst Aryan groups or Indo-Europeans or whatever you want to call them, we see this a lot with again, right off with the Hellenics, the Greco-Romans, and their usage of the fates. And there is a lot of cross comparison there. There's Iranes, which are like the Valkyrie or the Valkyries. And we see these disbursements of fate. There's fate that's centralized, close to the gods, very powerful. And as it moves away, it becomes more segmented and focused on different areas. Fate on the battlefield, fate for, say, mothers, and fate for even other worldly beings. So I would say, just because there's never really a mention of it, but there's nothing wrong with you applying that thought. As you get closer to the divine and work with our gods, there are many things that we do, and it needs to be allowable. I think that's how people relate. You can't have somebody coming in and say, no, don't look at that way. It's just that it's an understanding, okay, there's never any moment in which the Nornir are described, but there's nothing wrong with you applying in that way. There's a kind of cohesion that you will have with exploring facets and ideas that bring you closer to understanding fate, time, and again, the feminine, as Alzhirgli was talking about, interweaving. I often say, the masculine is vertical, it's the pillars, and the feminine is horizontal, like the weaving between the pillars, almost like cloth or a basket. And in this case, we see the weaving of fate and the threshold of the feminine. All time passes through the threshold of the feminine, just like children are born through the threshold of their mothers. So I really think that's an interesting way of looking at it. And so I would never discourage that, honestly. But I have to give it to you from the lore perspective first. And that, I think, is the names are indicative of purpose and titling. All of the gods are the gods of the Aryans. And whether the Greeks call them by certain names or whether the Norse or the Germanics call them by certain names, the titles have purpose in the way that our relationship to the gods has been built. We ask the gods, and very rarely, I mean, some of the titles are based strictly on observation. Thor, thunder, so observation. But the furious one, and again, observation, but with it's connected to battle, and that's Lord Odin. So all of the titles are kind of built around giving us glimmers of purpose and scope.
Something else to add on the observation about the Nornir. That is the root of the Wiccan. What is it? Maiden, mother, crone. Tripartite there. It's drawn from the same source, so you're not, and those functions are very much kind of what you're talking about in what you're saying. So to see that in that isn't odd, and it's not, it's not outside the norm of things that people have taken from that progression. So it is an expansion on a theme that I do think is useful and worthwhile to formulate thoughts in, though it's not, explicitly what the point of those particular Nornir are. But that said, where were we, Svan? I know you were finishing up.
Right in the last section here of 17. So we talk about the other heavens, and in our modern way of thinking, is it like a place above a place? But we have to remember the storytelling and the understanding of the heavenly mountains, which a lot of people forget about. There's the heavenly mountains, and up there is the Eidhaval, the plane of work where the gods have built Ausgarður, and there's the tree, and then there's like these elevated places connected to. So it's obviously this is symbolic of things, and I was kind of speaking about how the not residing in those elevated places, because it brings them closer to the middle world, is, I think, the important part of that. And we can kind of see too some understanding, because here, after speaking about the hall Gimle, then Gangleri asks, what shall guard this place when the flame of Surtur shall consume all heaven and earth? Haur answers, it is sad that another heaven is to be southward, or it is said, actually, this is I might be written wrong. It is sad that another heaven is to be southward and upward of this one. So I think it's said. And it is called Ond or Ondlangur, which means end long, or on the end long of heaven. So now we start to see the idea that there is an extension that is off and upward. And there is a third heaven. And again, the word heaven meaning elevated place. We, of course, conceptualize it differently because of both Christianity and its usage, but this elevated place. So end long is kind of off of heaven and upward, but there is a third, and it is called Vidblauen, which means the far blue, or the far or the wide blue, the great expanse, the sky, if you will, clearly referring to sky. And in that heaven, we think this abode is. But we believe that none dwell there but the light elves that inhabit these mansions now. So the Leosalvar, Alvar again, another title like Nornir, synthesizing with light. The Leosalvar are masters of light or the lords of light, if you want to think about it like that. Alvar is kind of like lords. And they inhabit this heavenly realm around the heavenly mountains of the gods. And even in the far off and uppers now, the only inhabitants there are the Leosalvar, and that they inhabit the world or the clouds and the starry expanse around the gods, in the blue and in the light, and they descend down into Midgard to encourage things to grow and perhaps protect and give guidance. We see this in the names, the Anglo-Saxons names like Alfred, meaning counseled by the elves, but it's just not specified. Or it could also mean a council elf, meaning somebody who's completely synthesized with counseling, which makes them good at it. Could be read either way. So I find that very, very interesting, but I think in a cosmological sense, and now as we know that the world is not hemispherical but spherical, and we're looking at the cosmos in a slightly different way from our ancestors, we notice that there are elevated places upon which the gods will place the souls that live amongst them into these places for safekeeping, up and away from the battle. And they do not remain there because it doesn't befit their adjudication of order in the middle world. They choose to be closer and more involved, which is, I think, a subject that we talk about a lot, that the gods are watching and that the gods are involved in our lives. And they do care and see when we all gather together and give them thanks and give them gifts. So, 18, about the source of the wind. Then Gangleri asks, whence comes the wind? It is strong, so that it stirs the great seas, and it swells fire. But strong as it is, none may see it, for it is wonderfully shapen. And then Haur said, that I am well able to tell thee. At the northward end of heaven, so in the upper realm, on the north side, the cold side, there is a giant or a Jotun. And remember, we talked about that too, like Alvar as a title. Oftentimes, Jotun is a title, and people immediately relegate it to one place and thing. And that is not the case. But the best thing I think for folks when they're reading the stories, when they see the word Jotun, is it's ancient, like the mountains, old. And before the gods organized themselves into the adjudicators of order, there were the Jotuns from various places. And so it is a Jotun in the shape of an eagle. And its name is Hræ Svelgur. Hræ Svelgur or Hræ Svelgur means carrion or corpse, eater, swallower or gulper. And he has plumes of an eagle. And when he stretches his wings for flight, then the wind rises from under his wings, as here it is said, Hræ height is he, height meaning title, who sits at heaven's ending, giant in eagle's coat. From his wings, they say, the wind cometh, all men folk over. So the picture that I did as the interpretation of cosmology I made a spherical earth because I wanted to connect that understanding and show that the application of mythos can apply even if you have a scientific spherical earth. And in it, there at the top, it's very small, but you could see it behind the strut of heaven. There is Hreisvelk, and he's or Hreisvelger. He's fanning over the world, making the wind, and there's little plumes of wind coming off of his wings. And I think that is really indicative of the nature of Jotun's in relation to the Midgard world. In we talk about pressure and buildup. Vanaheim is of life and of death and the cyclic nature of these things. Jotunheim is really resistance, and that doesn't necessarily mean against life, but the buildup of pressures. Wind is pressure building up, the heat, the cold, and elevations and lowering. So the Jotuns of that primordial tapestry of pressures. Even tornadoes and hurricanes are equalization between great, powerful pressures.
What are you doing?
So we have 19.
What dropped them?
About the differences between summer and winter. Then said Ganglir, why is there so much difference that summer should be hot, but winter cold? Howard answered, a wise man would not ask thus. And you'll notice this throughout the story. There's this kind of antagonism from the tripartite to Gangliri. There's a reason for this, as it will be kind of revealed. But in other words, they're already on to his ruse. And they are kind of jibing him because he's pretending to be ignorant. And I think in this case, he is truly ignorant of these instances, but they're jibing him to see if he'll crack, if he'll break his disguise. So they say, a wise man would not ask thus, seeing that all are able to tell this. But if thou alone art become so slight of understanding as not to have heard it, then I will yet permit that thou shalt rather ask foolishly once. So if you are so slow that you can't catch it despite everyone else, I give, pass to let you, ask this, but once. And then thou shalt be kept longer in ignorance of a thing which is proper to know. He is called Svalvsudur, or the soft south, who is the father of summer, and he is of pleasant nature, so that from his name whatsoever is pleasant is called sweet. The sweet south, the soft south, and even though it's not indicated by title, the general view is that this is of not mortals and not of gods, but of Jotun. So again, another indication of how Jotuns are interconnected in the middle realm. They could be Vanir, but it's not mentioned either way. But there is this deep connection between the Vanir and the Jotnar in the middle world with Midgard. They are deeply connected to nature and heat and cold and all of these primordial forces. So his name is Svalsudur, but the father of winter, old man winter, father winter, is variously called Vindljoni or Vindsvaller. It's like wind. Actually, I don't know about Vindjoni, but wind gale or gust for Vindsvaller, and he is the son of Vausadr. I think it's because, again, too, the English translation kind of throws me off sometimes. And these were kinsmen, grim and chill-breasted, and winter has their temper. Chilly-breasted, of course, means cold of heart. So we kind of get a glimpse into the hierarchy of the Jotnar in relation. We see this predominantly through nature and distance. Those that live in the Utgard, or the outer edges of Jotunheim, are control over other forces of nature, or influence, I should say, not total control, influence, because again, all of our divine, and that's a concept that I think a lot of Christians have a hard time, is that they have their God is the God of everything. And even though there's evil, he's the God of it, which would then lend me to think that he created it, but it is of him. But in our faith, the divine is great powers that share over the dominion of primordial forces, and that the gods are adjudicating these primordial forces in the benefit of the folk, and the Jotnar are either neutral or hostile. And so that means to be Asatru, to be trothful to the gods, is to be trothful to the gods that look benevolently upon the folk as we carry their breath. They gave us our breath. So that's one of the biggest points. It's not that they're in a completely different race or something like that. There is various natures to the title. And so, yes, they were cold-hearted, and from them winter flows. And the turning of that creates the cold and the hot. So 20.
So pause for a sec before we get to 20, because I think that's a good break. 20 is when we start getting into the list of the Aesir, and that's something that is really foundational to a lot of things that we do. We do have some questions from earlier on. We got a couple of questions stacked up. One, success breeds success. Failure breeds failure. Success is rewarded by the body of various feel-good hormones, by building psychological momentum, and by gaining spiritual might. Failure does the opposite. How can people who spent the majority of their lives failing break the habit and start to succeed? How do losers become winners? Thank you. Svan, what are your thoughts on that? And before we get to that, I think that's a very good question and very important question. What are your thoughts?
Well, one, I think that what you were talking about before is a key element to how people can become successful. Instead of building yourself on what you're not or what you're against, it's about building yourself on what you are about, who you are about, and what you want. And this applies, if you think about it, like when people say, oh, if you have a job you love, you never work a day in your life. The idea about going out there and making a living off of something you truly love is the same as building about what you are, not what you're against. Or so I think it's synthesis of the self and finding a way to build off of what you love to do. And that doesn't necessarily mean, the modern age can give kind of interesting pathways. Some people are better at it than others. But even looking into it, like I was just having this trail of thought where, let's say somebody, I don't know, likes to live at home and bake bread, and you could do social media. But let's say, what if you don't want to do that? The idea of being able to hold classes or to go to community centers and teach people how to share the love that you have with things, and entering into the community and trying to figure out things there, networking through common interest. There's so many ways, but it really is about positive outlook versus negative outlook. And Alzheimer, I'm saying this to the audience, Alzheimer gets me all the time with negative language versus positive language. And I have these furrows over my eyes for a reason, because I just grind into, and get angry about or what have you. And Alcirgo's like, whoa, why don't you do or think this way? And it's kind of like a smack in the face. So success does really stem entirely from whether you're going to feed the deer eating off of your soul, off of your tree, or being the Nornir and watering the roots. And that comes from positivity and from mindset. Even if it's dark, and I've been through some really dark times in my life, and you will go through these, but the key is bearing that in mind, searching for that, keeping that, writing it down. Water your roots with the well water. Don't be the deer. Don't focus on the positive. Try to build and focus everything that you're doing around stuff that you love. You love your family and you enjoy doing this, then you build from that. You don't slog in the mines. We thankfully are in a place where that's that kind of stuff. We're not getting the mines. The state, the commissar needs you to dig lead. Instead, we're at a point right now, and I think with all the doom and gloom and with all of the terrible stuff going on around us, it's not being naive. It's just that you are aware and you understand there are evil things, there are bad things, but you choose to focus your mind on the good things and build them for the sake of the things you love. And that's why I think a lot of people get us, they mislabel us in the sense that any of these things are coming, like we are harboring a place of hate. I think it's more self-reflective to them, and that we are doing much of what we do out of love for the gods, out of love for our ancestors, out of love for our family, and out of love for our folk. And that is why we have been so successful.
Yeah, I think so. I think the positive outlook is important, and I think it plays in. What I was going to focus on, though, that I see in the question itself that is meaningful is momentum. Momentum is so important. And if you've got a negative momentum to where you're accustomed to failure, it's hard to break out of it. What is the surest? So along with negativity is setting your sights on distant goals that seem out of reach and being discouraged because the goal you set is too far. So how can you possibly get there? You can never win. You might as well just not even try. And you go back in the cycle of losing. I would say establishing momentum by identifying small victories that you can achieve and doing those and stacking small victory upon small victory until you get closer to some of the bigger goals you have in your life. I think that that's relevant if they're completely unrelated things and you just need to score some wins. But I also think when you have those bigger goals, to break them down into a succession of a bunch of smaller goals so that you can chart progress and feel like you're picking up momentum. by doing those things. One of the things with our young men that I notice they have such a problem with is finding a girlfriend, getting a wife, starting a family. It's very daunting if you don't have success to build some success. Maybe the success for somebody is just talking to a girl. Say hi to a girl. Did you say hi to a girl today? Cool. That is a win. You have succeeded at one of your goals. Hey, start a conversation. Did you talk to her? Did she say something back? Counts. That is a second win. Figuring out small wins, because they look really different for whoever it is. If you've got a fat loss or a fitness problem, start tracking your food today. Cool. Track it tomorrow. Tomorrow, was it better than it was today? Awesome. That's a win. That's a little bit better. Build on the small victories and take stock of them. And I think that goes a long way towards it. And the other thing about Svan mentioned about the positivity, when you are so focused on what you can't do and the things you can't have, it's very hard to notice the opportunities for success that present themselves every day in your life. If you're not looking for ways to win, if you are looking for things that you are upset about or things that you have failed about, you don't notice the small opportunities you have to win. And you have those opportunities all the time. So looking upward, keeping your head upward, and picking off small victories that you can build momentum on, I think that is a huge part of it. And so that's what I would suggest on that. Question for VNS: recommendations for children's books for introducing our lore to my children. My kids and I are I apologize, guys. Anyways, back to the question. Recommendation for children's books for introducing our lore to our children. My kids and I read a God story every night, and all my children are 5 and under. Svan, do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, I have a huge one. Again, being a storyteller, and I don't think a lot of folks have heard about it. There is a book called Northern Pathways by Douglas Rossman. He was a Minnesota, I believe. He was a descendant of Scandinavians that settled in Minnesota, and he was a storyteller. And it is a phenomenal book for giving the broad outline of stories. I think that he takes some liberties in combining them, but he doesn't do it in a way that's egregious. There is another book I tell people to avoid because in personal experience, the liberties that are taken are kind of egregious. They kind of put a negative spin very lightly on things that I don't think are negative, but and that would be Odin's Children. So I'm not a big fan of that one. Mainly, as you're reading it, you can see Thor is easily angered because of his capriciousness, and so they kind of I just don't like that twist. And there's also again a kind of twisting of the way that the gods and the elves and humanity interact, where they kind of make the gods again uncaring. Northern Pathways by Rossman. If you're looking for maybe preteen or older, Norse Myths by Kevin Crossley Holland are great as a story-based sense, and they're a little bit more advanced than for say like young children, but they're right around 10 to 15 year olds. And then there's another one, and I was actually looking for it. I know the last name, but the title of the book, I believe, is just Norse Myths by Kiri is the last name. And it's actually kind of strange because it's written by two people, and it's their sisters. Yes, let me see. It is Tales of Norse Mythology by a one moment. Annie Kiri and Eliza Kiri, but on the book it says A and E Kiri. They're sisters. Now, one of the reasons why I love this book is because this was written at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, and the ladies that write this book, they present the gods in a very majestic way. They pulled Viking and Arthurian together. So they describe, instead of, say, Frigg being in some sort of longhouse with or wearing shoulder pelts and face paints, no, she is in her crystalline salon where she has the maidens with her. It's very majestic. It's really cool. I think it's a very good way, an interesting way. I think that the reason why perhaps people who do not like our folk want us to worship the gods barbarically is because as we present the gods and as we're in drawings and things, it reflects the nature. And I think that all too often Christians forget that all of the beautification of their religion really comes from the Greeks and the Romans. You know, if you look at the biblical angels, it's tentacle demon with eyes. And then once it becomes the stalwart man with wings fighting a dragon, that's actually Greek and Roman paganism. And I think that we are on that evolutionary trail. We see in the stories here and in the depictions in the Eddas that the Icelanders are drawing the gods wearing clothing of the age. They're wearing doublets. They have a falchion instead of a traditional, two-sided Viking sword or Norse sword. They are of that time. So I think what we are and should be inclined to do is to show the gods in an elevated sense, a sense of beauty, a mixture. Though we are living in an information age, so we have a unique ability to look at the past and know details that our ancestors didn't even know. They romanticized much of what they thought, and that is good. It has a kind of bombastic mythos to it, but now we have real knowledge. So the reason why the murals are drawn the way they are is because we have knowledge, so we have information, and then we have key elements that are unique little Easter eggs placed in there. But more importantly is that there is beauty and majesty in the gods, in their depictions, because that is a reflection of who we are. If you're drawing the gods as some sort of forest troll, I think that reflects what is inside. And I hope that on the journey they move away from that and go into elevated forward and upward things. But we see this even in the stories, just by words alone. The gods are not primitive, savage things. They are beings of gold and silver and light and fairness and waters springing up and words and songs being spoken. It's very, very beautiful. And that's why I recommend this book, because it's one of the first books I've ever read that kind of hints towards that. Very interesting. I don't think everybody's going to like it. But if you have a kind of an elastic if you don't view the gods simply in one singular way, I think it opens and broadens horizons, and it really does make some majesty for the children when they're hearing it. The idea of crystalline castles and golden roofed halls with beaming of light. It's awesome. It's a really good book.
That sounds cool. So, our next question. Hi, Nick. Thank you for all you do. Having gone over a section of Gylfaginning about dark elves, as they are described as black as pitch and evil, could there be a leap made that black people are these evil dark elves? Should we be treating them as such? Would our ancestors have viewed them as anything else? Or are we to assume they are different magical beings? So,
thanks for asking me. Answer's no. I'll let them answer continue, though.
all right. So, no, that's not the case. I think that they exist completely outside of the conceptualization of our ancestors when we're talking about our lore, because they are completely foreign to us and our cosmos and our existence. I think you see that our lore is very us focused, and it doesn't try to account for not us in the realm of humanity. It's our existence and the divine forces that are relating to it. I also don't think our ancestors conceived of different races of people as being some kind of mythic beings, but they treated them in a much more biological sense, because we have a word for that in Old Norse. We have an understanding for that. For the rare occasion that it comes up to where, a black person or Africa itself is depicted, Blaumather, blue man. And Africa itself, Blauland, is the land of the blacks, or the land of the blues, rather, I guess. But the conceptualization, how you made like black dye and stuff, it was a blue, it was a super blue variant. It's like the term to describe somebody who's like super duper black is blue black.
Right.
So yeah, it was black, the Blaumather, and there was no indication that was like some kind of a magical creature. It was another biological earth fauna thing that they were dealing with. It was clearly not them, but I don't think that there's an association between that and trolls or dark elves of our mythos. And, we also see that when they talk about Skraelings for Native Americans, there wasn't the idea that there's some kind of strange wood elf creature that exists in the woods. It was very much treated like another biological, being that they were interacted with, and not like a something that had inherent spiritual implications, but certainly something that was markedly different and not us. Svan, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah. And you had mentioned the Skraelingr, and I just recently was looking at, there's some people speculating the translation not meaning necessarily the people of like the woods or the roots, but also the people of screaming or yelling, perhaps because of battle cries or something of that nature. But yeah, for people that might not understand Blaumather, why would you call them blue men? Is because blue is a spectrum of color, from sky blue, which would be referred to as sky blue. And then blau in and of itself was more a midnight blue. It's the same with red. Roth is red, but it can be also pink. I think that's in European culture. Young boys wore pink because it grows, like the color grows up to red. So the pink on a young boy was representative of him being a young man. And then when he was a man, he was fully red. Vitality, things like that. But you know, these things are kind of funny, and they do cause confusion. But you know, in the part it says that there is one the people called light elves, but the dark elves dwell down in the earth, and they are unlike in appearance. So there's a big thing between whether we're talking about Svartalvar or Dvergar and dark elves. And I was trying to see in this case, because sometimes the translators will mess or switch these things up. But one of the big things about the dark elves and being black as pitch, they are synthesized with darkness. And I am of the belief that dark elves are actually the same as, say, a barrow wight or a mound elf is referred to sometimes. The Alvar that are connected to the land, that have traveled the road of death, and are synthesized with it, as opposed to the Svartalvar, which Svart now is the word for black in modern Germanic languages, but back then it wasn't. It meant swarthy and sooty based on material, like from burning firewood, or from blacksmithing. So there was this kind of difference between, and the darkness is a huge part of that, that they are of death and have walked the road of death and are in these places. Some of them are, I don't think there's any case where they're benevolent, but some are more neutral than they are malevolent to those who live. But sometimes they give over the sword to the maiden so that she can give it to her husband so he can slay a monster. There is a continuing poetic tropes or constructions. And so the dark Alvar are absolutely mysterious, I would say, more so. And out of the two, if we're talking about the Svart Alvar or the Dvergar and the Dark Elves, it is clearly that the Dvergar are more malicious and more capricious. The Dark Elves are mysterious and shadowed and undefinable, and their presence shows a thinning of the veil. Their presence in the barrow, their presence on a battlefield, absolutely is more built around the scariness of you're in an area that the lines between the worlds are blurring. So, but the Leosalvar are the ones they're, you know, focusing on in the heavenly realm, the light beings, the beings that are fair to look upon, like the sun. So, the Alvar title, Lord of Light, Lord of Darkness, and Lord of Soot, or Svarter is like Lord of the grit and the soot of the earth. So, I hope that helps break that up. Sometimes I wonder halfway through if I'm like,
That's all good. Meant to ask in a previous episode, but could you explain the style of vestments that the AFA clergy wear? Yeah, the AFA clergy wear stoles. A couple of reasons for that. Well, and specifically, I wear a gold stole. The Spekingr wear white stoles, and the Gothar wear blue stoles. And so they're useful in the fact that they're very recognizable in Western culture as a religious garment, as a religious item that sets you apart as someone leading a religious service. And that's pretty at least in the West, that's very immediately understandable and relatable, and is something done in a number of different religions, as a matter of fact. And looking into the origin point of it, it's of Latin pagan origins and not a Christian thing. The Christians copied it due to their association with Rome and their springing up in Rome. But it was originally something that Roman priests and learned, like Roman scholars and people of high intellectual acumen would wear to denote that. So that's that stole is what we wear, and it's one of those. It's why there's kind of dual use, to where you've seen various Christian pastors or priests. The Greek Orthodox have a different style of stole, but they still have a stole they wear. But you also see it at graduations and for professors and things that way, because it came from that, being someone of deep learning in ancient Rome.
They're also stoles they predate, obviously, Christianity, like you said. They are actually even before Roman organization. The Umbrian Gylfaginning tablets show a person wearing stoles, and they are the officiating priest offering ritual sacrifice. So I think that people that immediately jumped on the idea that we were somehow copying Christianity, but again, we don't define ourselves by what we're not. The usage of it is, to go and go to someone on their deathbed at a hospital, and if you show up wearing shoulder pelt and charcoal face paint and carrying like a stick with bones on it, people are going to think you're crazy. But if you show up there and you're dressed like a decent, normal Western civilization human being, and you have a stole on, there's absolutely no doubt why you're there. You're there to console, help, or possibly give the last rites to a member of your faith. And I think that when people attacked that, it really showed the immaturity and the juvenile mental state that many people are when they kind of take Asatru as a faith, maybe from the internet, and it's all about just being what they're against, and they're not thinking about what they want to be and who they are.
I think it's something that's a little bit, I don't know. I think there is absolutely that, and there's plenty of that. But I think a more generous place that some people come from is, and I started there. I had all these thoughts about how everybody's doing it wrong and what Asatru is supposed to be like before I'd ever actually done it in front of people or with people or had any frame of reference. I think we all start with a imagination of things, and things work really different when you have to actually implement them in the world and you deal with just the realities of things. So I think that genuinely, there are a lot of people that think you should go show up to do prison ministry, or show up to a hospital, or show up, to a council of religious leaders in your town dressed like Hylon. And I think that would be absurd on the face of it. It would be off-putting, and it would bring our faith into really bad repute. So trying to think of things that are meaningful, trying to be judicious about what you use and what you don't. But there's certain things that have meanings in Western society, and I don't think there's a need to shy away from those things unless the need is particularly overt. And in this case, I don't think it is. I think that immediately when people see us in stoles, there is a religious officiant officiating a religious happening. Everybody sees that picture and without words knows what that is. Svan's issue that he mentioned about the hospital, I've had that literally happen, where I've been in the hospital a couple of times caring for our members who find themselves there. And immediately the staff know exactly what I'm doing and why I'm there, and treat that with a level of respect because of, showing up, dressing nicely, shirt and tie, looking like you're serious on it, but also the stole. It helps that a lot. So that's why we end up doing that. Svan, let's get back to the text and learn about the Allfather.
Oh, yes. Okay, so moving into 20 of Odin and his names. Then said Gangleri, who are the Aesir? They in whom it behooves men to believe. Hauer answers, the divine Aesir are 12, then even Hauer, or just as high, not less holy, are the Ausinir, the goddesses, and they are of no less authority. Then said Thridi, the third one, Odin is the highest and eldest of the Aesir. And I think it's very fitting that it's Thridi speaking, because you'll see that in a list later on. He rules all things and is mighty as are the other gods. They all serve him as children obey a father. Frigg is his wife, and she knows all fates of men, though she speaks no prophecy. As it is said here, when Odin himself spake with him of the Aesir, whom men call Loki. Now, on that line in specifics, I would like to point out that I think that this point is talking about association. We've talked about the Austvinir, the most beloved ones, becoming of the Aesir because of association. But the other point is that in this, when they're telling the story to Gangleri, it's important that they don't reveal. So they are speaking about Loki as when he was aligned with the gods, and as it goes, it will turn. So it's very important for them to not. You mean the kinslayer who was walking amongst them? Whoa! Focus in on that. That's the reason I think that that's not done. There's an evolution of his alignment, and then eventually his breaking of troth and his deeds. So in this, Odin says, thou art mad now, Loki, and reft of mind. Why, Loki, leavest thou not off? Frigg, methinks, is wise in all fates, though herself say them not. And I think that this also really emphasizes a point of power between the masculine and the feminine. Lord Odin goes out. He injects himself into the world to gain wisdom. However, the power of Frigg comes from her gathering information that flows to her. She is receptive of it and has many avenues that channel information to her, and that she also has portents of prophecy. Yet doesn't speak on it is a very interesting point. I think that the evolution of speaking on prophecy that to come forth is because of a greater understanding of fate and will, and ultimately that reservation to make that proclamation into reality. And we see the reason why, obviously, with Lord Balder. Odin is called the Allfather because he is the father of all the gods. He is also the father of the slain. because all of those that fall in battle are the sons of his, adopt on. For them he appoints Valhall and Vingolf, and they are then called champions, Einherjar, which means the lone or single warrior, but I also find it interesting, Harrier, and the idea of rising or flying above. Those two are also connected linguistically. He is also called the god of the hanged, god of gods, god of cargo, and he also has been named in many more ways after he had come to the king Gerodr. So there is a story about called Grimnismal. It's the sayings of Grimnir, and in the Grimnismal he goes to King Gerodr, and this is a clear poetic connection. So the gods aren't just connecting only through Gylfi. Obviously, we see it with Kvasir, we see it with Gylfi, we see it with Gerodr, and that account is leading to much fame because he spoke of his names. So we were called Grimnir and Gangleri, Herjan and Hjalmberry, Thekur and Thriði, Thúður, Úður, Hellblindi, Háor, the high one, Sadur. Actually, let me see. Just double check. Yep, Sadur. Sadur, Svipal, Sangatal, Herteter, Nikar, Biljakar, Bálekur, Balvörkur, Fjölnir, Grimnir, Glapsviður, Fjólsviður, Síðhottur, Sigskeggur, Sigfaður, Nikuður, Álfaður, Átriður, Farmatir, Oski, Ommi, Evenhaur, Biflinti, Gondlir, Hábarður, Svíður, Svidrir, Járkur, Kjálur, Víður, Thror, Ígir, which is where we get Yggdrasil from, Thunter, the strong one, Vakur, the Skilfinger, Váfúður, Hroptatir, Gautur, Veratir. So one of the most interesting things that you gain from the list is that it clearly states that when we talk about the tripartite of the gods, and we see the tripartite of the gods throughout history, this is the reveal that the tripartite within the tripartite, who is Lord Odin, is who is talking to Gangleri, because there is high, just as high, and the third in the list. So he, just like with King Gerod, he coyishly reveals the nature of those he's speaking with. And this kind of poetic meter would have been spoken quickly. And the whole point is taking words that sound similar but have completely different meanings, and they just, in Old Norse, rhyme together, if you will. So I just kind of wanted to go over some of them. We have Grimr, which of course is the
Okay, so pause for a sec before you do, because I want to get this. We got a super chat came in.
Oh.
From Jill, $1 wants to know, Svan, which type of metallic paint did you use for Freyr's golden Sonnenrad and Gullinbursti's bristles?
Oh, I didn't use a paint at all. I used gold leaf. Now it's not it's not real gold. I wish it was. If I could make that happen, I would. It is that you could buy at any arts and craft store. It is expensive. And there was another issue that I ran into was I didn't know how much I needed. And I was originally going to do Gullinbursti in gold leaf as well once I found out the success of and the process of it. Because the first, when I did the sonnenrod around his head, it was terrible. And I was on a scaffolding. It was late. It was probably 3:00 in the morning. I'm trying to push through. I've only got 3 days. I'm sleeping on the floor. So I'm at this point where I've already slept one night on the floor and I'm getting frayed at the edges. Let's put it that way. Oh, that's no pun intended. And I ended up trying the process and was terrible at it. And I was very close to kind of, I don't know. I not that I could call it quits. Not there's no option there. The dedication of the Hoff is coming. But I was doubting myself. I was like, I don't know if I could do this. I don't know if this is gonna happen. And then I went to sleep, and that was like by 4 a.m. Woke up at 9, 10 in the morning, and it's like, okay, we're gonna try this again. And went up and started doing it, and it was perfect. And then I was like, okay, I got it down, gold leaf, everything. But I decided to change, going away from Gullinbursti. I only did his bristles. I didn't want to do the whole of his body because I felt that it would take away from the splendor of Holy Grail. So I opted out on that, kept the extras, and now at Thorshof and soon Njordshof, there will be that same gold going on there as well. One of the big things I'm going to be doing at Njordshof is gold leafing much of the image of Lord Njordur, but it's not paint at all. It's a very thin film, and you have to work on it in a very specific way in order to make it lay smooth and not get bubbles and not crack or break. But once you get it, it's pretty easy. It's just, if you're not used to working with it, it can be frustrating in the beginning, but perseverance. And
it is in fact magnificent.
It is amazing. The pictures don't even do it.
It really is. Also, Stephen in Japan donated another $10 towards Thorshof Heat. Thank you, Stephen. We appreciate it. And Svan, if you would go back into telling us about Lord Odin's names and what some of those mean.
So, couple of things. Obviously, I spoke about how there is the High One and there is the three, and that is why at Odin's Hof, there is a rock written in runic that says that Lord Odin is three but one, and one who is three is the reference to this title, Thridi. Obviously, I'm speaking about Vodin Villive or Odin Villive, and the other names that kind of, and the only reason why I bring it up is because I wanted to kind of explain poetics. So when we see like something like Hjelmberg, helm bearer, helmets were extremely rare and were often reserved for those of lordly station. So Wilhelm is a name that all of those names mean the helm that is gleaming or willful and leading, because the very mention of a helmet in relation, like a metal helmet, was about station. But you see these kind of combinations between very dark themes and very light themes, like the cargo god. There is very specifically a correlation with this Aryan god, and I hate to say it that way because it sounds very disassociative, but I want to talk about the gods as the gods are the gods, and then each of the Aryan branches individually has interacted and has deep relations. There's one interesting thing about the god we call Odin, and that is the correlation between death and prosperity or riches and things of that nature, which seems to be hard of a stretch, but there is this correlation between fate, the gaining of a good death or the gaining of great riches while alive, and it also lends to most likely the possibility that Lord Odin was prayed to more than just battle. The god of cargoes, of roads, of carrying things for trading. So it wasn't just war, but again, it's about prosperity. Prosperity and death are deeply interlinked in the Aryan spectrums. When we think of the Hellenics, they have Hades, the god of goodbyes. That's where we get adios, to say goodbye. But they didn't say his name often, so they called him Plutonus, or the giver of riches. And again, this may have a poetic meaning. It could also, in the Hellenic sense, grave goods, but we don't quite know. But clearly in the Germanic sense, Lord Odin is a lord of war. He's a lord of death, a lord of magic, and a lord of prosperity in his own right. Traversing and trading involved moving and traveling, and so that was important. There is another Svipal, changing. We see Hellblindy, kind of. I've heard people ask me, what is that about? Well, I think that has poetically a different meaning than just being hell blind. Is that he is the survivor of death. He synthesizes himself, death in a godly sense, not so much a mortal sense, but that synthesizing with Yggdrasil did not end him or change him in a different way, but instead he returned with the power that he got there. So he walked the road of death and returned. And then we see others like Spear Lord. Clearly the connections where throwing the spear over or at the enemy army was to give them in sacrifice to Lord Odin. And I think that really came about from the Migration Age. I think there were massive cults of the gods at that time. Some folk were honoring, they would have the boar as their symbol, and they would have perhaps Vonic or particular Vonic gods like Frey and Freya. And then others would honor Tyr, and others would honor Lord Odin. And they had practices that culminated with their remigration back to the Scandinavian realm that translates in these stories. But like Hertiter, Her, warrior, and Titer is like the host of the warriors, the one who holds banquet for great ones. And lastly, I wanted to talk about was Thuther, thunderer or sounder. So Thuther is an interesting one because we know that Thor is derivative of the literally meaning thunder. So I heard someone once try to say that Thor is just an outcropping of Lord Odin. I mean, as a son would be, sure, but more or less that Odin and Thor are but the same, and this Heiti gives credence to it. I think that's very bad to go into lumping the gods into boxes, but I think it's more important to remember the roaring that he did when he took up the runes. And sound and the key points of song, and like in the Halvamal, the rune poems are not called poems, they're not called runes, they're called rune songs. So there's always a sense of song, speech, and powerful voiced magic coming from Lord Odin. So just some interesting ones. Yeah, shield shaker, wand bearer. There's a lot of them. Very, very interesting stuff. You can look up translates. Now with AI, it really, really helps. But you could also, there is a old Icelandic and Old Norse dictionaries that are really, really good. I believe the last name Goda, Goda, or Goeda, is a good one. So.
So let's go ahead and finish out that chapter.
All right. So Lord Odin secretly reveals the tripartite within the tripartite. He is speaking to the interloper, the one who's sneaking in, and he knows, just like with Geirröður, he won't just say it. He's got to let it slowly build in. Then said Gangleri, exceeding many names have ye given him, and by my faith, it must be indeed be goodly wit that knows all the lore and examples of what chances have brought about each of these names. Then the High One made answer, it is truly a vast sum of knowledge to gather together and set forth fittingly, but it is the briefest to tell thee that most of his names have been given to him by reason of his chance. There being so many branches of tongues in the world, all peoples believed that it was needful for them to turn his name into their own tongue. And a lot of times you'll find people speaking about this as some sort of allowance to universalism. And that is not the case, because the peoples that are being referred to are the peoples of Europe, the Germanic branches, and the tongues. I mean, they did obviously know that there were people outside of themselves that had tongues, but the concern of whether they worshiped Lord Odin or not is kind of null and void. It's devoid of the point. But it kind of indicates how broad spanning Lord Odin's worship was amongst the people, and why we have everything from Wednesday to the word God, from the Lombardic word Godon, as they called him. So by which they might the better invoke him and entreat him on their own behalf. But some occasions for these names arose in his wanderings, and that matter is recorded in tales. Nor canst thou ever be called a wise man if thou shalt not be able to tell of those great events. I think that last line too is also Snorri making a poke with encouragement for more skalds to come about and learn the stories.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is, and I know I say it on each of the episodes, but I'll take the liberty. This is just such a special piece of work for us, because it's very much laid out not to tell a story, but this is the cosmology of, our forefathers' religion. This is what our ancestors believed. This is his presentation of what Asatru is. And it's laid out in such an accessible way from somebody who, in this poem, hey, this is the character knows nothing and is starting fresh, and it's being laid out right in front of him in a very instructive way. And this is the best example of that we see in our lore for these high things. I think the Havamal has a parallel, and it's being laid out as, useful stuff for the reader to apply. This lays out the big picture, the big cosmology in the most clear way. And I really like that. We'll see that as we go through the different gods that it points out. Something, Svan was very quick to make the point that it mentions that Loki is of the Aesir. But one of the things that sets this whole thing out that's important is these are the Aesir are 12 that it's good for mankind to believe in. And you'll see this list that we go through. Loki is mentioned, and there are 14, and there's a very specific reason that, so something else on this list of the gods. You'll notice this list in this order is how we present the gods in the Trulagmal, in a variety of things, and very specifically in our ordering of Hoffs. So, man, there's 14 here, but it says there's only 12 that are the ones that are beneficial for man to worship or for man to believe in. That's really intentional. And I think we'll see when we itemize this, running that count of who they are and why two of them are omitted from that count. And that makes itself kind of self-evident as we go through the list. But yeah, this is the list in the order of Hoffs that we're going to establish to the gods. The decision on that, there has always been a lingering kind of question for a long time in modern Asatru, like, oh, there's so many gods. Which gods do we worship? Which gods don't we? But what about this one? But what about that one? And there's any number of obscure local deities or deities that were venerated by one tribe that aren't attested by others. We could drive ourselves insane trying to figure out the perfect answer to all of the things. But the answer that we decided on was, okay, to solidify, there is a list in the lore that presents this in a straightforward way. These are the Aesir. These 12, it's good for people to worship. And so that's kind of the starting point of the concept of the Trulagmal, the concept of separating this is this and that's that, and laying down some foundational doctrine of exactly what we believe. So everything isn't always a shoulder shrug of everybody doing their own thing. This is structured, and we've built upon that structure. And the idea of using that was I remember the conversation that I had with a former AFA leader, Brad Hicks, that was, he and I were having a discussion on this. He was a mentor of mine for a number of years there, and a good friend of mine at the time. And we were going over, what we need to start making we need to start drawing some lines on, hey, this is what we're doing. These are the gods we worship. This is some specificity. And it was his idea to bring up the Gylfaginning and how this list is laid out. And from there is what I decided on when it was, when I resolved for us to get multiple Hoffs and not rest at the first Hoff. This was the ordering process that seemed self-evident to me to go down. And it's something that I think the Aesir have blessed as we've moved in that progression. And it's been kind of weird. It has been a noticeable current in Earther for the stages of progression, and once one is accomplished, how smoother we are towards getting the next one. There's a number of different signs and things that reveal that the Aesir have been approving of the way we're doing this ordering. So I'm bolstered and excited about that. Before we get back into the text, Drew donated $10 towards the Sigerheim mower. Thank you, Drew. We appreciate it. And yep, that is the end of our questions that we've got stacked up. So, Svan, tell us about Asatru.
All right, section 21 of Asatru. Then said Gangliri, what are the names of the other Aesir? Or what is their office? Or what deeds of renown have they done? Haur answered, Thor is the foremost of them. He that is called Thor of the Aesir, Asatru, or Okuthor, the rolling Thor. And Thor, of course, derivative of or etymologically is thunder. He is the strongest of all the gods and men. He has his realm in a place called Thrudvangur, which literally means force or strength fields, might fields, or power or force fields. Though that's getting a little bit more cosmic and really broadening for interpretation. But Thrud means like strength or might, and Vangur is the area, the field upon which he built his section in the heavenly realms, as it's described in the stories, and the rivers that flow between them. And his hall is called Bilskirnir. Skirnir is a name that we should be familiar with because it's also the name of Holy Frey's servant or man at arms. And so Bil means like a flash, or I mean, excuse me, a kind of a booming flash, or it's the flash of light. It's like a lightning crack. The blink fast burning light. In that hall are 500 rooms and 40. That is the greatest house that men know of. It is thus said in Grimnismal. And bear in mind, the idea of rooms is again a status symbol, like the helmet that we spoke of earlier, the rooms in the house. But I think it's also super interesting because all of Lord Thor's dominion in relation not only just to protecting and being of the gods as a great hero, but there is much to do with the home, the fields, the land around, many children. There's just this great sense of freeman energy around. And it says here he had 500 rooms and more than 40. So over 540. So reckon I, Bilskirnir, with bending ways of those houses that I know of all of hall roofed, my sons I know the most. Bear in mind too, Grimnismal, Gerod the king did not know that this was Lord Odin that he was torturing, and now he's revealing because he is the father of Thor, and that's where it kind of sets in for Geradr that he has made a big mistake. So then it goes on out of verse and says Thor has 2 he-goats that are called Tan Gnoster, or Noster if the J is soft, and Tan Grisner. Tan means teeth. Noster is gnasher, and Grisner is gritter or grinder, and a chariot wherein he drives the he-goats that draw the chariot. Therefore, he is called Okuthor, driving Thor, moving. He also has 3 things of great price. One is the hammer Mjolnir, the crusher, which the Rime giants and the Hill giants know because he cuts into them. And when I talk about the buildup of pressures, when the Jotnar build these great forms of pressure that are absolutely detrimental, and then suddenly they're broken and they're no longer able, is very. I think there's an association there that we can kind of place. But when it is raised upon high, and that is no wonder, it has bruised many a skull amongst their fathers or their kinsmen. He has a second costly thing, and best of all, the girdle of might. And when he clasps it about, then the godlike strength within him is increased by half. And it's also worth noting that the girdle is called Earth Might. So the striker of all the Aryan branches is born of the earth and the sky. He has yet a third thing in which there is much virtue. His iron gloves. He cannot do without them when he uses his hammer, grasps his hammer shaft. But no one is so wise that he can tell all his mighty works. And of course, the gloves are Iron Gripper and Iron Glover. Iron glove and iron grasp. Yet I can tell thee so much tidings of him that the hours would be spent before all that I know were told. So I like that little ending. Is I could tell you everything, but we don't have enough time for that.
And it also speaks of Thor's fame. It's not. I think anybody who reads the lore, there's many stories of Asatru doing things. He's a prime figure in a great number of the stories that have made it to us, and I think that was the case in our ancestors' time as well. His fame preceded him. Notice over in the chat, is having a favorite god like having a favorite parent? And then some follow-ups with having a favorite parent not being good and not something we would do. So, yeah, and I think the analogy is kind of apt. No, you would feel wrong and disrespectful to say you had a favorite parent. But certainly there's reality to where there's one of your parents you are likely closer to than another. The other thing is, at different points in your life, those parents switch positions in what's closer to you or what's not often, depending upon your circumstance, depending upon your experience. When you're a little boy, maybe you're closer to your mom. When you're a grown man, maybe you find yourself relating to your father more. When you're a father yourself, all of these things, yes, it is really similar to that with your parents, because if you had, 12 or, 26 parents or whatever, you would have some that you were closer to or that you naturally related to better. But you'd feel bad saying that you had a favorite because no, you love both your parents. Of course you do. And yes, I feel the same thing with our gods. I wouldn't want to talk about my favorite one of the gods. It seems wrong and impious. But there's certain gods that are, I have a better or a closer relationship with, and ones that I don't at a certain time, or ones that, I feel a closer connection with depending on experience. So I think it's a really apt analogy in that sense. And no, you don't want to have a favorite god, but you do certainly have gods that you're closer to. And, there was a time where everybody needed to have their particular patron deity. And I think that's missing the point of polytheism. But I also don't think it's wrong for there to be, in the Asatru folk assembly, we have, I could actually count, but I think like 16 Gothar. I don't think we have a deep enough core of priests to have our priests specific to each of the gods or whatever. But in a situation where we had hundreds of thousands of members, then sure, there being specific priests for specific deities, I think makes sense. I think the lore attests to people who are, were full truly with a deity to where they had a full level of troth or like a heightened level of troth with a particular god. I think those things exist and we see those, but yeah, you don't want to give up the beauty of polytheism to turn your polytheism into a monotheism. I don't think there's a need to do that. And I also think, like you said, you wouldn't, for the same reason you wouldn't do that to your parents, is just a fundamental impiety towards that, or a lack of familial fealty in that. Svan, do you have something to say on that, or do you want to tell us about Balder?
Oh, I was going to move into that, but I did want to say one thing that's very interesting is the relationships that we have with the gods in their totality as the Aesir, which I think is important that we know that, and that we also realize the Vanir are the Aesir. They are interconnected. There's no, I'm Vanatru, and that kind of stuff is ridiculous. I think, though, when we look at the relationships we have with the gods, what we often find is when people are in the beginning of their relationship with the gods, they go towards the beneficiary, the gods that they feel familiar with, and that they feel that there is an interconnectedness because they're looking in themselves. More interestingly, and one of the cool hurdles that I think a person of our faith living their life is when they go into the deficiency realm, where they suddenly start having a relationship with the gods because they're looking inside themselves and seeing something missing. That is a huge spiritual landmark in I think that soul's journey. You go from kind of the God you relate to, the God you like, this and that, and then it comes to a point where you're looking at yourself and you're like, this is missing out of me. I'm going to reach out and build relationships in hopes to guide and build up the weak points or the missing points or what have you. So that's all I wanted to say about that was relationships. It's easy to look for the positive, and then when you see some of the things you need to work on, reaching out and making those the positive. So 22 of Balder. Then said Gangliri, I would ask the tidings of more Aesir. Howell replied, the second son of Odin is Balder, the bold one, and good things are to be said of him. He is best, and all praise him. He is so fair of feature and so bright that light shines from him. A certain herb is so white that it is likened to Balder's brow. Of all grasses it is whitest, and by it thou mayest judge his fairness, both in hair and in body. Now, this doesn't mean albinism, but it does show a sense of the lightness, the whiteness, the fairness has been a measure of beauty with our ancestors for a very long time. And there is an actual flower. I was hoping that people in the audience could find it real quick because it's eluding me right now. But it doesn't necessarily mean it pops from his brow, though. I made a little Easter egg of that at Baldershof. It just says that it is likened to his brow. So to have a broad and clean and fair brow, not marred by the sun, was clearly a mark of perhaps royalty or just beauty in general. I don't quite know, but he let's see. Sorry, I lost my. A certain herb that's likened to his brow, and of all. Okay, both in. He is the wisest of the Aesir, and the fairest spoken, and most gracious, and that quality attends him, that none may gainsay in his judgments. He dwells in the place called Breidablik, or the broad flash. Imagine kind of light, but not in a strike. It's just this overarching horizon of light, which is in heaven. And in that place may nothing unclean be, even as is said here. Breidablik is called where Balder has a hall made for himself. In that land where I know lie fewest baneful runes. So there is no foulness in that land. There's no evil magic being done. And again, I love as the story is laying out the Vale, Idavol, the valley of work where the gods have built Asgard, and the sections and the rivers flowing through it. And here is this great expanse, and the hall is bright and shining, and in this place there is just no ill will between the gods and between the souls that reside there. And we move to 23 of Njordr and Skavi. The third amongst the Aesir is he that is called Njordr. He dwells in heaven, in an abode called Noatun. Again, this also emphasizes the idea that heaven is an expansely place with outcroppings and places leaving off, and it means the boat town. Though the etymology of that can be debated. Most folks think of it as the boat town. He rules the course of the wind, and he stills the sea and fire. On him shall men call for voyages and for hunting. He is so prosperous and abounding in wealth that he may give them great plenty of lands or of gear, and him shall men invoke for such things. Bear in mind too, hunting, sea voyage hunting was very much a big thing. My grandfather actually owned an island where my family was legally allowed to go there and take one seal and hunt it, bring it back, and eat it as they became more strict on the animal laws, which I'm absolutely there for. But that caretaking and that hunting is again in reference to that. And we talk about that all the time. The dominion of the gods. Ullr is the god of the hunt, but he's also the god of self-defense and self-preservation and self-standing. And Njordr is here. If you read it literally, he's the god of the hunt. How can that be? He is the gods share dominion over many things, and you can call upon them in your relationships. But I think this is also referring to hunting by sea. And perhaps fishing might have actually been included in that. So he is so prosperous and abounding in wealth that he may give them great plenty of lands or gear, and to him shall men invoke for such things. Njordr is not of the race of the Aesir. He was reared in the land of the Vanir. But the Vanir delivered him as a hostage to the gods and took for hostage in exchange him that men call Hainir. He became an atonement between the gods and the Vanir. Njordr has too a wife, the woman called Skavi, daughter of Thiazi the giant. Skavi would fain dwell in the abode which her father had, which is on certain mountains in the place called Thrymheimr. But Njordr would be near the sea. They made a compact on these terms. They should be 9 nights in Thrymheimr, but the second 9 in Noatun. But when Njordr came down from the mountain back to Noatun, he sung this lay. O loath were the hills to me. I was not long in them, nights only 9, and to me the wailing of wolves seemed most ill after the song of swans. And then Skavi sang, sleep could I never on the seabeds for the wailing of the waterfowl. He wakens me, who comes from the deep, the sea mew every morn. Then Skavi went up into the mountains and dwelt in Thrymheimr, and she goes for the more part on snowshoes and with bow and arrow to shoot the beasts. She is called the snowshoe goddess, or lady of the snowshoes, so it is said. Thrymheimr it's called, where Thiazi dwelt, he the hideous giant. But now Skavi there abides, pure bride of the gods, in her father's ancient freehold. So we see this movement between heaven and earth. We see the goddess of the snowshoes, whereas you will also see reference to Ullr as god of the skis. And what we're really looking at here is not. I don't think it's wise to look at it flatly. What snowshoes represent, what they mean, the expanse of being able to travel over great distances in skis, or to be able to track prey in snowshoes without sinking, and especially the perilous nature of hunting in the wintertime versus hunting at any other time of the year, has a heavy sense of survival, and there is that rawness there. We had talked a little bit too about what if there was some, like when we talked about the horses with the sun and the moon, what if there was a kind of deeper meaning? And the Gothar in the AFA came up with something that really struck me. And it's not the explanation all out, be out. It's just an interesting consideration of the water tables and the way that water moves from the mountain to the ocean and then is evaporated and then returns. And we have this kind of cycle being done. Again, material reflects divinity. So I'm not saying that that's what that story solely means or anything, but it's, again, building those relationships, looking into those things. That's one of the things that I think was really poignant coming from the clergy. I thought was just, it's good to think these ways. And just like that story about the Nornir, the question about the Nornir. So we move now to of Freyr, or Frur, depending on if you, the EY, and Fruya or Freya.
So possible.
Yeah.
Over in the chat, there's a comment that I just think is worth remarking on. People praying to the Asatru gods may have a better chance of being heard. This might help outreach to people who pray to a foreign god that ignores them. So I think it's really hard, because our best tool, the only tool available to us, I guess, I guess the two tools available are our experience and our imagination. When it comes to how do the gods think, the only thing we have to go by is kind of the way that we think and our experience and the knowledge that the gods are so much more than us. I've always said a really good place to start, the very least the gods are, is the very best that we can imagine humans to be. They're far beyond that, but from our scope and our perspective. So it's one of the things that I often wonder. Gods are gods, and I don't know there's limits to their capacity of how many people to listen to or how many people to pay attention to. But I think something that is probably true to a degree or holds some sort of sway that's interesting. We are at a special time in the development of our folk right now. It is tragic that such a small number of our folk worship the Aesir, but it also presents a really special opportunity and a really special relationship we get to have with them. If all of our people, which we would like to see happen, and we work hard to make sure we're making progress towards happening, were to return to worshiping the Aesir, then your voice becomes one in a much, much larger ocean of voices. Right now, I think, is the best time in the history of ever for an individual person to develop and be impactful and have the gods pay closer attention to them, because there's such a small number of people worshiping our gods that those who do have a disproportionately high, chance for audience with the gods. It's like you're going to seek an audience with the king on an off day to where there's only a couple of people in line, as opposed to when there's thousands of people in line. You've got more time for their attention to be on you. And I don't mean to limit whatever that might be, but just from my own understanding, you have the ability to be impactful in a way that if everyone had come home to the gods, you have a much harder time being individually impactful. So there's an opportunity for each of us to make the best use of the attention of the Aesir being upon us, to gain their favor, to make them proud, to impress them with who we are and the men and women that we exist as, how we function in our life, what we accomplish, the character that defines us. Never is there a better time or a time where the gods are likely to pay more attention to us individually than at this moment. And I think that's a special opportunity that we all have. Svan, you're mute.
Terribly sorry. No, I was going to say, in relation to many folk they relate immediately to Christianity because of its over-pervasive power in our society. And a lot of times we've come up in those families. Really interesting thing to think about too is old ancient Judaism, where Christianity comes from, though many try to virulently deny it. The idea that you shall put no other gods before Yahweh, and he's specifically talking to the Israelites, is, very telling in its nature as to the relationship that their religion had in regards to foreign religions for them. And this was the case well into Europe, that the idea was kind of beating out other gods. And then, of course, Saul of Tarsus, who was changed his name to Paul to blend in with the Greeks. He was the one that kind of started to try to convert non-Jews into the religion. And this is where the lines started to get blurred. And also the formulation of one of the key things that you might hear Christians say today is that all gods that are not their God are demons, which is funny because, one, the word demon being Greek, the word they should be looking for is the Aramaic or Hebrew word shadim. But there's no mentioning of this idea that these gods are shadim. This is theological framing well after in Europe, where they're trying to make sense of one, why were the European Christians were trying to understand why are the Israelites the chosen ones. Just like today, a lot of modern Christians are like, oh, the Israelites are no longer the chosen ones, and the Church of Christianity is, except they can't quite define which church is. But as they're scrabbling for this kind of positioning, but they also needed to try to make sense of the idea that why were these gods worshipped all over the world and not the one God from Israel. And that ended up leading them to, oh, they're all actually shadim that were once angels, or malaks is the word that they should be using. And it sounds like they're like you're reading a Klingon treatise when you start kind of going in. It emphasizes how foreign, like, oh, all the gods are actually shadim, and the shadim were once malaks of Jehovah or Yahweh, and it just starts to get wild. And if you paraphrase it this way too, I think it emphasizes the foreignness to a lot of folks. But there again, others are just going to jump through the hoops that they need to. But that concept is a later concept. Now, their neighbors, they were a Semitic religion amongst Semites, and sure, yeah, they had some crazy stuff going on down there. It seems to be pretty much across the board. It was just that the Israelites were like, their God was like, instead of human sacrifices, I'll take the foreskin, which is also pretty crazy. Definitely better than burning babies, but all around it shows kind of an overarching nature that's very foreign from the mindset of our folks. And we could joke and meme about it or what have you, but in all seriousness, it's just that if you dig deep enough, anything after the philosophers of Greece, after the Neoplatonists' influence of Christianity, it is really foreign. And we need to be aware of that. I remember too, there was a part of the Bible where it said that, like, of the north, the might of Yahweh diminished under the people of the iron wheel and their gods. And I find that interesting. And of course, the connection to victory through the divine was direct. When we win, my God beat your God kind of thing. And we see that in them a lot. In Europe, we don't necessarily see that because the reality is everybody was worshiping the same gods. We saw it in the difference between, say, Romans and Germanic because of the different levels of their considerations of society, tribal versus metropolis, and so on and so forth. But it was very easy for them to go amongst the Germanics and create equivalencies because they branch from the same source. So things get very, very odd when you add in Christians who are Jews coming from Judea or Palestine or whatever you want to call it. They come into Turkey, they go into Greece, they go into Rome, and eventually non-Jews kind of take over that, and they humanize their God as a heretical rabbi, and they go from there. But they did bring in Jews from the area. Charlemagne said, don't mess with the Jews. They're our biblical cousins. Leave them alone. And so they spread. And so even after that, with many Jews converting to Christianity, either by force or by choice, there was also influx of ideas coming there. It's a very wild thing where we start to look at the way we perceive perhaps, foreign gods, other people's gods, and so on. So that universalism that happened is, I think, a detriment. I think it's important that we just consider that the divine spirit of a people is connected to the people, and that our gods are connected to us, and that is of most importance. Outside of that, I leave that just is not in my consideration. And yeah, I try not to make it so much a big deal, or even to the point where it's like, oh yes, they're actually Jotuns. I know that's a very interesting and desirable path for a lot of folks to go down, but it's more or less irrelevant if you focus on the positive and building the spiritual strength between the folk and the gods. Everyone else outside of that is, again, outlandish.
All right. Well, let's read about Freyr and Freya.
Okay, 24 of Freyr and Freya. Njordr in Noatun begot afterward 2 children. The son was called Freyr, and the daughter Freya. They were fair of face and mighty. Freyr is the most renowned of the Aesir. He rules over the rain and the shining of the sun, and therewithal the fruit of the earth. And it is good to call upon him for fruitful seasons and for peace. He governs also the prosperity of men. But Freya...
Pause for a sec. I want to point out a couple of interesting things that go on here. Just make note of, and I've said this a number of times, but I think it kind of shines here in a different way. The pop culture references to our gods tend to be very one-dimensional. Freyr equals, male fecundity. Thor equals strength. Balder equals bravery, because that's what his name means. Odin equals wisdom, or whatever those things are. It's interesting that Balder is the wisest of the Aesir, and everyone trusts his judgment. That's not usually what you think of first when you think of Balder. Here it talks about how, Freyr is the most renowned amongst the Aesir. I think most people would suggest that that's Asatru if you're talking about like battle prowess. Our gods are great at lots and lots of things. For us to boil them all down and like, oh, if for a god to be wise, that has to be Odin. Odin's the only god that's wise. Saying it like that obviously makes it foolish, but we all too often don't. We get trained in that pattern recognition. So it's interesting in this particular presentation of the gods that sometimes, their glory is manifested in different ways than, just the Thor equals strength and thunder. This god, there's a depth here that I think is maybe something that people haven't considered, or not something that people are used to, that I wanted to point out. Carry on.
I also want to bring up a point. So a lot of people don't make these associations, and I would like to make a connective point. In Idavol, in the Veil of Work, they said that Thor's home is in the realm called Thrudvangur. That's important. So let's go into what we're, as we're reading. So it says, but Freya is most renowned of the goddesses, and she has in heaven the dwelling Folkvangur. So a lot of folks I wanted to make the point of the field, the idea of the area or the land around a hall having a name, having a purpose, having a sentiment that reflects the nature of the divine. These domiciles are a kind of a honing, and then as it gets to the land outside, it's a broader point. And we can see that, and then that makes it very interesting with the idea of the name Folkvang, or the field of the people. And really, we can kind of surmise, okay, well, what does that mean? We can surmise a little bit more with the name of the hall and how deeply interconnected Holy Freya is to people, to the passions of the people, and their appropriation, their proclivity to numberings, I guess. But it's also, again, it's about, there's a deep connection there, I think, with the energy of, say, people and the community. It says the dwelling is called Folkvanger, and whereso she rides to the strife, when she rides to war, she has one half of the kill, and Odin the other. As it is said here, Folkvangers is called, where Freya rules, degrees of seats in the hall, half the kill she keepeth each day, and half Odin has. And her hall is called Ses Rumnir, which means the seating room, or the room of many seats. So again, kind of the field of the folk, a place where people gather, or a lot of people gather, and then the roomy, or the roomy sitting place. There are lots of seats. So there's always just kind of this connection to an abundance of people as a symbol of her might, and where I think ultimately her dominion dwells. So her hall is called Sesrumnur, and it is great and fair. When she goes forth, she drives her cats and sits in a chariot. She is most comfortable to man's prayers, and from her name comes the name of honor, Fru, by which noble women are called. Songs of love are well pleasing to her. It is good to call on her for the furtherances of love. So one of the things I wanted to speak of really there is the clear mentioning of the masculine praying to her, and that is not seen as some sort of taboo, but in actuality is, again, giving blessing to her, with the ability to incite the passions of someone you love. I think that beauty and passion is her dominion. It can fall into possession, which is a scary thing, which I think that's why she has kind of some darker aspects to look at. But a lot of the idea of singing songs in prayer to her in the furtherances of love and passion, I often associate Holy Freya with even the aesthetic of beauty and the aesthetic of what beautiful art can inspire in people when they see it, and that feeling, that power that wells up from them. 25. Of Tyr. Then said Gangleri, great in power do these Aesir seem to me, nor is it a marvel that much authority attends who are said to possess understanding of the gods, and know which one men should call on for what boon soever. Or are the gods yet more? Haur said, yet remains that one of the Aesir who is called Tyr. He is most daring and the best in the stoutness of heart. He has much authority over the victory in battle. It is good for men of valor to invoke him. It is a proverb, that he who is Tyr valiant, who surpasses other men and does not waver, he is wise, so that it is also said that that is the wisest is Tyr prudent. This is one token of his daring. So it's not just his combat prowess, it's his prudence, and it's his valiant and wisdom. This is one token of his daring when the Aesir enticed the Fenris, the swamp dweller, the wetlands or bog dweller, Fenrir, the wolf, to take upon him the fetter Gleipnir. The wolf did not believe them that they would loose him until they had laid Tyr's hand into his mouth as a pledge. But when the Aesir would not loose him, he bit off the hand at the place that is now called the wolf's joint. And Tyr is one-handed, and is not called a reconciler of men. He is not called for peace amongst men. He is an adjudicator of victory in war. The concisement and the sense of just absolutism. But I think one of the things that I find most kind of overlooked is I think that when we look at, say, Lord Odin, and even Tacitus spoke of this, is that the Germanics were very concerned with Lord Odin. And there's, again, it's pretty solid, but we can say there is some speculation when they he kind of analogizes Lord Odin to Mercury, is that where their soul goes if they die in battle. But there's also the point that Tyr is about the victory, the I would say the aftermath of the battle. When you are victorious, you have to, you take those lands, you allocate the lands, you allocate resources, you allocate what's going to happen to those who have been taken over. And so the concept of justice, and I mean that a lot of people kind of intermix the justice of, say, law, which I think would be more Forsetti's boon if praying. Tyr, I think, is more about the wisdom of leadership and about the allocation of everything from funds to resources, a very the god of the living after the battle, whereas Lord Odin was very much the god of the dead after a battle. And I know that's kind of a broad way to say it, and I don't mean that in any disrespect of things, but it's like just a inclination for our folk to consider these things as to why Lord Tyr is called the god of justice. That justice is really judgment, adjudication, as opposed to, say, asking him for boon in a trial. It is more about, after going across the threshold of war and battle, that we find there's the need for allocating things. So, we go with 26 of Bragi and Idun. One is called Bragi. He is renowned for wisdom, and most all for fluency of speech and the skill with words. He knows most of skaldship, and after him, skaldship is called Bragar. And from him, his name, that one is called Bragarman, or woman, who possesses the eloquence surpassing others, of women or of men. His wife is Idun. She guards in her chest of ash those apples upon which the gods must taste whensoever that they grow old. And then they all become young, and so it shall be, even unto the weird of the gods. Then said Gangleri, a very great thing, methinks, the gods entrust to the watchfulness and the good faith upon Idun. Then Howard, laughing loudly, "'Twas near being desperate once, I may be able to tell thee of it. But now thou shalt first hear more of the names of the Aesir." So he gives a kind of enticement to obviously the theft of Idun, but we see this in the core of every Aryan branch. There is the Soma of the Arya in India. There's the ambrosia of the Hellenics, the golden apples. One thing that I see a lot of people do is they try, is there some correlation between Eden and Eden because of the apple? No, the Bible says fruit specifically, and they're most likely talking about pomegranates. The change to the apple was for European folk when Christianity was being taught amongst them to make it more relatable. No, so that etymology is not connected. It's like, just I've seen people try to make the connection between Niflheim and the Nephilim. No connection. So it's perhaps just that coincidence in that when two languages are kind of passing by each other. However, I think it's really interesting. One, in the list of the Ausinir, Idun is not there. And there is the list of the Ausinir that folks should pray to, but that doesn't mean that the gods outside of this list don't exist, which is why we have chosen to give them the title Austvanir, the most beloved ones. And that is clear with Idun and Bragi. Bragi is of the gods. Idun is an Austvanir. And she holds and is entrusted. So that shows that the Austvanir as well are given extremely high trust and power. And I also, going really cosmic, I've the golden apples of youth and of light and of life. I thought it was very interesting when you think about it as the gods in their heavenly realm, the connection or correlation between life and light and sound, which are two parallel powers. And again, when the light and the sound of heaven comes to the earth, it is prismatically represented in Bifrost, which I find very beautiful. But these are more just kind of, again, mental considerations and things like that, stuff that we do talk about amongst the Gothar and postulate. Okay, so 27 of Heimdallr.
Pause for a sec.
Yep.
All right, so let's call it a night on the text for tonight. We do have one question left, and I want to make sure we're not, rushing through any of these things. I think we're at I don't know. This is such an important one. I want to take our time on it. We got one more question this evening. Do we have any reason to believe the gods demand us to fear them, like how Yahweh demands us to fear him? Svan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I don't think that there is a demand. However, there is a healthy respect, and we see it in the names. We see it in the stories when Lord Thor, he has the sliver of stone in his head that causes great aggravation. And when he is angry, as it's said in the story, that few are spared from his wrath, even though it's not directed at them. They're just around him, and he is just letting this loose. But it's about, yes, again, that great respect. It's not about a demanding of fear. I think that the capabilities and understandings of the powers of the gods, especially amongst our ancestors, knew that they were presiding over and the ability to affect these primordial domains. So saying a prayer to Skathi while on the mountain in hopes that an avalanche did not take you, praying to Lord Njardr when you go out to sea, and hoping that you don't get sideswiped by foul storms or whirlpools or what have you. We see that there are inclinations towards more respect and, again, not fear, but just a healthy respect towards certain gods over others. Obviously, Baldur, no, but like Lord Odin, the idea is that Lord Odin understands so much that your place in it is, you might not understand things, and he is doing what he must do. And so there is a kind of overarching sense that you have to respect his workings, even though you might not understand them because of the broader view. But there's no demand to be. I mean, I think if you're disrespectful, it gets worse. When the king of Norway gives a false, that's an alarm. When the king of Norway gives a false sacrifice to Lord Odin, he takes him because of the blatant disrespect. That, I think, is the elevator of whether or not there's a demand of fear.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think the natures of our gods versus the desert god are really, really different. Jehovah makes lots of demands. He's super jealous, and you have to meet all these requirements, and you have to hyper focus on him 24/7, and he wants to punish all of the things. There's a very different mentality at work there. Our gods aren't like, if a person were that obsessed about what people thought of them, it would be a tremendous sign of weakness in a person. Our gods don't make a lot of those kind of demands, but they're very, I don't want to put it like, if Odin wants you to be afraid, he can certainly terrify you with great ease. Like, there are just the magnitude of divinity is awe-inspiring, but I think that it's not just awe-inspiring, it's also, there's an inherent fear, and it's not the fear of a bully or somebody who's threatened you or demanded that you be scared of them. It is a natural response to something that is so much greater than you are, and a due reverence and due respect towards it. Now there's levels of things, but it's like, if all of a sudden you found yourself in the ocean next to a blue whale, you would be terrified. Not because it's malevolent, not because it demands that you fear it, but because the immensity of this creature that is near you, that is so much more powerful than you and so much larger than you and just so beyond your comprehension that it would be scary. So yeah, I think there's a Jehovah literally demands that you be scared of him. I don't think our gods do that. I think they can choose to terrify you if they want to. I think that they, are perfectly capable of inflicting that fear if it's necessary to their foes or to those who displease them. But I don't think that that's the default stance. A default stance of very cautious reverence, absolutely. That's out of an abundance of piety, and that should be inherent to any mortal dealing with any deity just by the nature of the difference in station. No, I don't think that our worship of the Aesir is motivated out of fear. I don't think fear is the motivator. We hear fear in certain by names and things, especially with Odin, but I don't think that's as if his worshipers ought to be terrified of him. He is fearful to his foes. He's fearful to those who cross him. He's fearful to those that he is on the other team of. The point of being Asatru is that we have troth to the Aesir, of which Odin rules as the king. So, yeah, I don't think that there's a malevolence inherent in the question that I don't think is present with our gods in their relationship with their worshipers, that I do think is very present, certainly in the Old Testament conception of Jehovah or Yahweh. But yeah, I think that you never want to go the wrong way and mistake it to where, you think the gods are your homies. That's absurd and ludicrous, and it's offensive that so many people in modern times pretend that's the case. There is no equity there. There's no equality. There's no familiarity as if you guys are buddies. There is a appropriate devotional relationship between God and worshiper, between I think that there certainly can be a deep love there, a familial love that's important. I think there can be a kindness exchange. Don't get me wrong that way, but when you say friends, it implies a level of equality that's not really how that works. Friends is in, they're on your team. If you're talking to your kids, like, no, Thor's your friend. In the sense that he likes you and he's on your team, sure. In the sense that he's just like Billy down the street that you're making sandcastles with, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I think that we get that. So we're belaboring the point here, but I think that remembering that very healthy respect for the difference in station is very important. But I don't think we see the kind of pettiness in our gods that is very prominently displayed in the conceptualization of Yahweh.
But I think that's why the Pharisees was against the Rabbi Yeshua, was because he was changing those kind of conceptualizations, and they were like, no, you need to fear. And then as it went, they literally romanticized Yahweh and humanized him into now it's love. And I think they needed to change their message in order to attract non-Jews in Europe. So it's pretty funny when you kind of just observe it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. As always, I'm looking forward to our next episode because I've been wanting to go through the Gylfaginning with you for years now. So I'm excited about that.
I thank you for having me. And I'm also glad to I'm leaving from this show and making my way southward.
Okay. Well, then, anybody who can make it out to Njordshof this weekend, do the thing, be there, meet Svan, meet me, or if you've already met us, say hi and get to spend some time with us. I would love to, meet new folks and interact with old friends, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great. Next week, we'll be joined by Spekingr Daniel Young to talk about piety and right action. Looking forward to that. Should be a good show for you. And we'll see you. Hopefully, I'll see you this weekend. If not, we'll talk to you next week. Until then, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA. Remember, victory never sleeps.
Bye, everyone.